Okay. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Village of Lake Bluff Board of Trustees Committee of the Whole meeting. It is Thursday, August 6, 2020. Could I have a roll call, please?
Trustee Ankerman. Here. Trustee Charlo.
Here.
Trustee Dewart.
Here.
Trustee Markey. Trustee Markey. Here. Here. Trustee Meyer.
Here.
Trustee Toll.
Here.
Okay. Due to the COVID-19 emergency, this meeting will be held primarily virtually. As required by law, at least one representative from the village will be present at Village Hall, and the virtual meeting will be simulcast for members of the public who do not wish to view the virtual meeting from another location. The boardroom can accommodate 13 people, including members of the public body and village staff, while maintaining the 6 feet of social distance between individuals required by Executive Order 2020-43. Accordingly, the opportunity to view the virtual meeting at Village Hall is available on a first-come, first-served basis. Members of the public may view and participate in the meeting via online or dial-in, which is 312-626-6799, and when prompted, ask for a participant ID, which I should mark is 884-1619-0394. The meeting also will be live streamed at lakebluff.org, channel 19, and broadcast live on Comcast channel 19. Once available, a recording of the meeting will be posted on the village website and periodically rebroadcast on channel 19. Okay, let me first explain a little bit what a committee of the whole meeting is, because it does differ from that of a regular board meeting. No decisions will be made in terms of voting tonight for any specific ordinance. This is an opportunity for the Board of Trustees to legally and to get together with Opens Meetings Acts and talk together about various issues and topics. Tonight's issue will be some changes, perhaps to an ordinance. That's what this discussion is about, and we want to give plenty of time for the trustees to be able to discuss and go through this. At the end, I will open it up for public comment, and people will be limited to 3 minutes, and we will hold folks to the 3 minutes of public comment, and that will be at the end. But that's how we do this, in order to give the trustees ample time to talk amongst themselves and work things out. Also at this time, we do allow anyone who would like to speak on something that is not on tonight's agenda. Do we have anybody that wishes to speak on something that is not on tonight's agenda? Okay, hearing nothing. All right.
Lynn, could you give the process for people participating via Zoom, to tell them how to do that? Should they want to participate at this moment?
Certainly. So if you are participating via Zoom, you can use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. You can submit a question. We're happy to recognize you. If you're on the phone, you can dial *9, again, star and the number 9, and we will recognize you also.
Okay. All right.
Mr. President, it's Village Attorney, can I just make one comment?
Yes, please do.
Further to the comment you made about the fact that we're in committee of the whole, we are technically not meeting as the village board. This is a committee of the village board called the Committee of the Whole. The reason I wanted to make that clear is that the village president's emergency declaration and order, the village board extended until the adjournment of the next meeting of the village board. This is not a meeting of the village board, so there's no reason tonight to have another motion to extend the emergency order. You'll have the opportunity to do that on Monday night.
I stand corrected. You're absolutely correct, sir. Thank you for that clarification. All right, we will now have the consideration of the minutes from January 27, 2020, Committee of the Whole meeting. Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Toll. Do I have a second?
Second.
A second by Ms. Markey. Any corrections, additions? All right, I guess we do a roll call for this.
Trustee Ankerman. Aye. Trustee Charlo. Aye. Trustee Dewart.
Aye.
Trustee Markey. Aye. Trustee Meyer.
Aye.
Trustee Toll.
Okay, now we're going to have a discussion regarding special event regulations for village-owned property. All right. What I would like to do first, if okay with the board, to streamline this, there are virtually, and in my opinion, two parts to this. I would like us to take first Section 4 in the proposed ordinance, which is an amendment to Title 7 of the Village Code, which permits us for special events on public property. I would like to take that first before we take Sections 2 and 3 on this. One thing I'd like to remark on, that the village board has a responsibility to protect public health and safety. Certainly, what has happened with the COVID-19 has really heightened and enhanced that responsibility of our board to the community. So we are seeking at this point to formulate our procedures into a consistent and uniform permitting process which conforms to the governor's rules concerning the COVID-19 pandemic, which will help us further protect the health of our community. So with that, let's discuss and open that up for discussion, which is Section 4. Drew, do you have anything, or Peter, do you have anything to want to prompt with that as we begin?
Well, how about this? Why don't we do this, President O'Hara? Have Peter Friedman just quickly review an overview of the draft ordinance, and then the board, the committee of the whole, if you want to certainly talk about in detail the policies and procedures.
Well, you know what? Yeah, you're absolutely correct. Hold on. I missed a page here. And since I'm having a little trouble with my earphones tonight, and I apologize. You know what, I think we'll help first, and then I'll turn it over to you, Peter, right, which I should have done, is what I do in the usual meetings, which is give sort of the highlights of this in a memo that was sent to the board. Lake Bluff has a long history of authorizing and supporting a variety of special events. Presently, the village sees about 25 special events per year, including numerous block parties, the Lake Bluff Farmers Market, 4th of July Parade, Lake Bluff Criterion, Rib Fest, It's a Wonderful Life holiday event, and many more. While special events and large gatherings on village property create community and provide entertainment to village residents, they often require the village to mobilize village personnel and other resources to protect the safety of the public, manage traffic, and ensure that such gatherings do not create harm or nuisance to village residents and businesses. During this COVID-19 pandemic, and with the executive orders issued by Governor Pritzker restricting many forms of indoor activities, there have been a number of requests to use village property and rights-of-way for outdoor activities. In response, the village has authorized restaurants to serve food and drinks on public property and fitness-related businesses to utilize the village green for yoga classes. The village has also authorized neighborhood block parties in residential zoning districts and allowed a local church to hold religious services on the village green. All of these authorizations have been conditioned upon the sponsoring organization satisfying the relevant COVID-19 executive orders issued by Governor Pritzker. Due to the increase in demand to use village property for special events, there is a desire to adopt a more comprehensive and formal process to better enable the village to plan for such events, avoid scheduling conflicts, and to protect the public's safety. As you will see, many of the draft application requirements will be similar to current village practices, and the ordinance is meant to codify these requirements. Consistent with board direction and the village brand, staff has tried its best to say yes to special events while protecting the village and its residents, requiring insurance when appropriate. 4th of July Parade, Criterion, Rib Fest are examples of that. These draft regulations are designed to treat every applicant, regardless of their message or content the same. If adopted, the Lake Forest, Lake Bluff Community Church will need to seek a permit for services on the Village Green. The Park District will need to secure a permit to utilize the Metro Chain parking lot for the Go Color Fun Run, Walk, and the Village Green for Bluffinia. And the brewery will need a permit for block parties along Scranton Avenue and the Village Green. Okay? As part of the conversations, it's recommended the Village Board specifically discuss the following. Effective date. These regulations are intended to help ensure the public health during the pandemic. That said, it is useful to have reasonable regulations in place to govern the use of village-owned property after the pandemic concludes. Village Board might consider adopting these regulations and amend them from time to time rather than adopting them with a specific sunset. Applications, cost, deposits, and payment of cost. Historically, the village has not charged a permit application fee or to reimburse the expenses incurred for services and equipment. As an example, the village has not required the organizers of the 4th of July parade to reimburse the village for its expenses, which are approximately $6,000 annually. As drafted, the regulations allow the village, if they wish, to adopt a permanent application fee, and allows the village to seek reimbursement of its cost if the village so wishes. Okay, let's discuss one thing that you want to add, Peter?
So it's at the board's pleasure. I can review more specifically the ordinance or whatever you all think is helpful.
Would that be?
Do you want me to?
Yeah, why don't you give us a little more of the nuances so that will help that discussion?
Okay. So the new Chapter 5, which would be inserted into the village code, is for special event permits on village property only. This only relates to events on village property. The ordinance has a number of definitions that are fairly standard and self-explanatory. Specifically provides for the definition of a special event is something that would be on village property. A march, a parade, a procession of people gathering on village property in an organized way. All of those types of activities would require a permit. And then the ordinance, and particularly when those types of activities may require special village services, such as fire services or public works. There is a requirement for in order to receive a permit, the organizer must apply for the permit. The provision has detailed list of things that must be provided in order to have the right to a permit, including a description of the event, the estimated number of people that will be at the event, an estimate, you can never be sure, and a statement of what type of village services may be required in order for the applicant to hold the event. After those things are submitted, the village administrator will review them and determine whether or not all the requirements are met. And if they are met, and there's a list of items that have to be provided, then the village administrator is required to issue the permit. The conditions for issuance of the permit, obviously the applicant has to comply with all the submittal requirements. There can't be a conflict with village property or with another event on the proposed date. The event must not be conducted for any unlawful purpose or in a manner that violates any rules or regulations or executive orders and ordinances. If there's an insurance requirement that the village administrator can waive, there is a requirement for a deposit and payment of costs. The deposit is basically a cash deposit in advance to cover any village services, the cost of any village services. At the end of the day, if the costs are less than the deposit, the entire the remaining balance would be returned to the applicant. And then the applicant generally is required for costs incurred by the village related to the event, such as for village services and equipment, costs to restore village property after the event, etc. If the village administrator denies an application, the applicant has the ability to appeal to the village board. The village board is then required to hold a hearing. The applicant and anybody else who is interested in the application can come forward, and the village board will make a final decision, and that would be the final decision from the village, would be with the village board. There's of course a provision that says once a permit is granted, a violation of the permit or the requirements of the code would be cause to revoke the permit, and a violation of the code or permit is subject to a standard code violation fine, which is anywhere between $250 to $750 for each violation.
Okay. Thank you, Peter. I will now open it up for the discussion amongst the board. Somebody want to tee off?
Okay, well, I'll go first.
All right, Bill.
Then I fully support the proposed ordinance. Let's move forward towards approval, at least on this section 4. This permitting process really is nothing controversial. It's well measured. It's in line with reasonable processes that are in place in other municipalities on a permanent basis. It will promote the public safety during all events. It's agnostic to content or message, as it should be. I think it's really important to see that statement that these draft regulations are designed to treat every applicant, regardless of their message or content, the same. So, fully supported. Would urge all of us to give support to this section, and then we can move on with the rest of the discussion.
Thank you, Bill.
I'll go.
Okay.
Hi. So I guess I would start out by saying that I feel like having a permit for using village property, I feel like that's long overdue. I was surprised we didn't have a permit process. So I'm happy to see this. I'm in favor of a special event permit. And I think I'm probably going to echo Bill a little bit here in saying that it's, I think it helps the village when people come to utilize the green spaces and areas in our village that we do it in a safe, consistent manner. I guess it creates a little bit of a level of responsibility for the group or the individual that's using the village property, that they'll be responsible and uphold the parameters set forth in the permit. So I like to see that too. I know we talked a little bit about if we would want to keep the permit in place going forward, because we're putting it in place right now because of some of the COVID issues. And I do think it's a good idea to keep it in place going forward. But I'd also like to have us review it periodically, maybe every 6 to 12 months, to make sure that it's not creating additional work for admin or it's just causing additional work in general. So I would like to keep it going forward and just make sure that we're reviewing it and it's making sense to use it. And then in response to fees, I guess given the economic climate right now, I don't feel like we need to actually create a permit fee to go with this or cost. I feel like that's something we could maybe look at down the road, but I certainly can't imagine that we would be asking nonprofits to pay a fee for the permit. I feel like that's something we could look at down the road.
Okay. Thank you, Joy.
I'll chime in now. I don't think I'll say anything new other than what Bill and Joy have just mentioned, other than I think a deposit would be appropriate. An application fee, I'm not sure I would support at this point, but I think a deposit is important just to keep people accountable, and if there is damage to village property and there's cost to the village, I think it can be taken out of the deposit, as opposed to trying to hunt somebody down and fine them or otherwise recoup village costs. But I'm fully in support of a permit process. Like Joy said, it's long overdue, and I don't think it's contrary to anything that any other municipality is doing.
Thank you.
I'd agree that I believe it's a responsible direction for the village and the board to take. I add really nothing to the discussion that's already been put forward by others at this point. And I'm prepared to talk about fees and deposits as a second issue once we get past this one. But I think that it's an appropriate and a responsible action by us, and it's an appropriate reaction and a responsible act by those who wish to use the property as well.
Thank you.
Who will be next? Well, following Trustee Markey and Trustee Myers. I mean, I guess I was surprised to notice that we didn't have such a process for landing our resources, village resources. And I'm actually very pleased that we have a uniform and fair process where if you fit the standards with a village administrator, you will be granted a permit, basically. Also recognize that this is an administrative chore. You have to go through that process, but this is, I mean, that makes our village resources, the use of our village resources to be safe and consistent. And we prevent conflict of scheduling. That's actually an important one. So to considering these elements, I'm absolutely for that regulation.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Ankerman, do you have anything that you want to add to the conversation?
I am in support of what others have already said. I guess to play the other side of the argument, there are lots of details to what's being proposed, and I want to just understand it's within the framework of, like Bluff has tried to operate from a position of yes, and a casual approach that has been successful in the past, and simply codifying it will be something that we need to do. It's overdue, but I think the question that I would want to ask is, do we think that anything that we're doing is going to produce any undue burden from successful and existing events, such as were named earlier, like the parade, the bike race, and I don't think that it is. But that is a question that I want to think about and answer, so that we understand what is the incremental burden that's being placed on, if you will, to existing events that are presently successful. And if it is administratively filling out a form, planning ahead, and going through that process, that seems very reasonable. And it sounds that, like, informally, these events and groups have checked the boxes that we are now going to codify. So I just want to ask that question again for existing and successful events. Let's understand and clearly state what the increased burden would be, and if it's simply going through that task of planning ahead, filling out a permit, that type of thing, that is very reasonable and will not break something that isn't broken already. It will help to codify things that are actually already happening, and create a structure that other future events can be planned for and successfully and carefully executed. So,
I think Barbara brings up an interesting point, and I think her word was reasonable or reasonableness, and I think we look at the process. Having looked at the proposal, I don't see anything, as Barbara pointed out, that provides any additional burden. It's pretty straightforward. There may be some opportunities for organizations who have repeating events to be able to file a single document that references multiple dates. I'm thinking of Bluffenia, for example, and put those dates down there, and then if there would be a violation or an issue at event number 3 of 5, then it potentially wipes out the ability to move forward with events 4 and 5, and something on that nature. But I think that it's appropriate to be reasonable in terms of what our expectations are, and that works for both the village's administrative side as well as the applicant's administrative side as well.
Thank you.
I think once, the first time somebody applies for a permit, they may need a little bit, but especially for these annual events, it will probably be just cut and paste, or even essentially the same thing as the previous year. So we may need to assist applicants a little bit starting out, but get the hang of it, and it won't be really any burden after the first time we do it.
Sure.
There's, following those comments, there's also a part of that permit where you know that you will be granted that resource of the village. You know that you're on the schedule or on the calendar. You know that you will have that. You will not meet basically a conflict of calendaring. And I find that's actually pretty positive to that for that memorandum.
Yeah, that actually helps the village and our Glenn, who is our assistant to the village administrator, spends a lot of time trying to coordinate a lot of these events. I should think that a lot of these kinds of things will help him to do his job a little bit more easily by being able to plan forward and looking ahead for different events. And I think forecasting that and better utilization of facilities and locations is only a plus.
Okay. Would anyone else want to weigh in? Okay, what I'm hearing is that the board is okay with moving this portion forward in terms of permitting process, formalized. And it does not seem, correct me if I misunderstood, but it does not seem that at this time we're interested in putting a specific fee structure in place. Is that correct? I'm assuming?
That's my preference.
Okay,
That
anyone?
would be my preference too. My preference too.
Okay, anybody else?
Okay, that's fine.
Okay,
Just so I'm clear, but to Trustee comment, the deposit would still be retained?
yes, I think,
not?
I don't know, board, would you want to maintain a deposit which at the end could be returned if not utilized? Or a portion thereof not utilized?
Is that predefined or is that a designated amount by the village administrator?
Village administrator.
Okay,
That's appropriate, I think. And also, don't forget, we need insurance. I think that's in here.
oh, yes, that's definitely on, that,
Or consideration of insurance requirements.
Yeah, we tried to be, when we put this together, we tried to have some discretion, or a lot of discretion, because historically, boards over the years have tried to be very, and this, I've heard it from this, but you guys repeated that same theme tonight, the idea that let's be supportive of events, let's have that, that's part of our culture, it's part of our brand, and there's going to be moments when there's events that are certainly riskier than others, and so let's not try to create so many hurdles that we discourage the group of 3 middle schoolers who want to have a gathering at some location, a village property, and try to say, well, you need your insurance and here's a deposit, those things. But the idea of like trying to, for the big events like the Criterion bike race that have a high risk and lots of injuries, separated shoulders, road rash, all those things. Yes, absolutely. Insurance, identification, those things that make it fit, the right puzzle to fit the pieces.
okay, all right.
Or do you think we need to use some sort of algorithm or matrix to make those decisions, or is
I to be honest with you, we've been administratively, like the cover memo said, we've been doing a lot of this over the years, and just making like an administrative function to try to protect the village, and having the absence of a real policy, and so asking for insurance at those moments for big events, and we haven't asked for deposits. So having a matrix, I think may put us in the category of creating hurdles for events that people want to see that may not be prepared or sophisticated as groups to handle those. So again, I think discretion is, at least for now, is maybe the way to go. Just from our experience doing these. and putting it into a table. Well, let's see, you're, GH. Okay, well, you're one. It could be perhaps maybe too much of a hurdle.
Okay.
Okay.
I suppose if somebody disagrees with the requirements that you
They can take it up with you all.
bring it.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know what? I might disagree with the make it custom. I mean, make it on a case-by-case basis. I think there should be a process given the size of a meeting, the size of the. There's a difference between your 3 high schooler and your bike race, and I think there could be a simple matrix or a simple process to make it fair and consistent. I think a process that is fair and consistent is what we're looking for here. We might not make it too heavy, but at least there would be something available to have a rule, a yardstick, literally.
Maybe what we could do is put together like almost a history to say this is what we required of groups for events of a certain scale, so it can manage the expectations of applicants to say, oh, I'm going to fall in this category, so this is what can be expected.
I like it.
I think history and precedent is important.
Mhm.
Having that out there for people
Okay.
with expectations.
And I think that it is kind of a living document in that as new events take place and new experiences are had, it may be that we choose to do something else based on our new experience. But historically, we have put a great deal of trust and confidence in staff, specifically the village administrator, to make those types of decisions. And we're not unhappy with the results so far. And so continuing to rely on that experience and expertise is a continuation of what we've already done.
Okay. Drew, do you have enough information now to bring this forward to Monday night's board meeting?
Yes, confirming 0 application fee, no payment for now sought for reimbursement from agencies, but we'll get a deposit to cover ourselves and put that in there. So yeah, I think we're good on this side of it.
But the deposit is discretionary, or a deposit is varying? Yeah,
it's based off the scale, like what we're looking
Right.
at here. Yep.
Okay, well, this will come up again Monday night, where we would be prepared to vote on that issue. All right.
And Madam President, okay.
I'm sorry,
That's
what?
it.
That-
Please continue.
Thank
All
you. That's all right. Okay. All right, we will move on to the next section, which deals with the public nuisance. The draft ordinance also amends Section 4-1-2 and 5-5-6 of the Village Code to explicitly provide that it is a public nuisance to engage in activities that spread contagious or infectious disease in the village, such as hosting gatherings in violation of public health orders. This would provide the village the authority to cite someone for a nuisance if they do not comply with health orders when conducting special events. And then the next section would deal with the repeal of Municipal Code 5-7-4-8. Well, we open this up. Do you want to elaborate a little bit more, Drew, or Peter, on this particular aspect?
Do you want me to do it?
Yeah, fine, Peter, please do.
So there are 2 provisions here. We were asked in drafting this ordinance to provide some standard provisions that are in many municipal codes, not only with regard to permits, as we've just discussed, but also nuisances. As well as provisions with regard to the emergency orders that have been issued by numerous village presidents and mayors subsequent to the outbreak of the COVID pandemic. So what we put in the ordinance are 2 provisions. The first one, which is Section 2, is, as the village president said, amends the provision in the existing village code that identifies specific public nuisances. There's a section section 412 of the Village Code has pages of things that are public nuisances. And some of them talk about public health and not endangering the public health. But in light of the COVID situation, we drafted this to be very specific to contagious and infectious disease. The language here is admittedly broad. It's a policy decision as to whether you want this provision in or whether you want to narrow it in any way. The practical impact of this provision is that if a situation arose where somebody was engaging in conduct that caused, the potential spread of a contagious or infectious disease like COVID, the village could issue a citation and cite to this provision. And when the village issues citations, it always needs to have a citation to the existing code. That's the first thing the judge will want to see. We can't just cite somebody generally for something that we don't like. We always have to look to the village code. So we simply drafted this provision to be very specific and broad. Section 3 is slightly different. Section 3 amends the provisions of the Village Code dealing with emergency powers. You may recall that at your March 18th meeting, which was the meeting immediately after or right around the first stay-at-home order, you adopted several provisions to update the provisions in the Village Code dealing with emergency powers, because they obviously hadn't been updated in many, many years, if ever. One of those provisions obviously clarified the authority of the village president to issue emergency orders. As you know, she has done that. You've extended those orders, and the order continues to this date. And all that this provision says is that if somebody violates one of the village president's orders that the village board has continued in effect, that violation would be a violation of the code, subject to the standard $250 to $700 fine for each violation. So those are the two additional provisions that we provided at the direction to provide as many options as possible. I'm happy to discuss them further, or if any questions.
Board, it's yours.
Well, I'm happy to start with a suggestion. I know that we have received some input that raised some concerns about how broad Section 4-1-2 subpart 10 would be. So for purposes of our discussion, I would suggest to the board that one option to address some of those concerns would be to insert the phrase intentionally or recklessly several times in this paragraph, such that it would state contagious or infectious disease, to engage intentionally or recklessly in any activity that promotes the spread of contagious or infectious diseases throughout the village, including without limitation the now insert intentional or reckless maintenance of unsanitary conditions, intentionally or recklessly hosting gatherings or conducting businesses, and intentional or reckless failure to maintain or operate properties. That's one thing I would propose to the board to consider in order to address some of the input that we had. With that, I would support these sections.
Okay. Thank you, Bill. Other input, please.
I've got a few things. Here's the thing. I empathize with anybody who wants to get back to normal. I wish more than anything to get back to socializing without worry, traveling without restriction, and opening up our businesses and restaurants. But we can't do that yet. It's true that our positivity rate in Lake County is hovering around a relatively low 5%. But more concerning to me is that our hospitalizations for COVID-like symptoms have been increasing for the past several days. We're still at a stage in this public health emergency that to let our guard down now would mean significant increases in infections and another round of restrictions to our businesses. This is what's happening in other parts of the U.S., and I'm willing to do what it takes to keep it from happening here, including putting this provision in place. Now is not the time to be flouting the guidelines. It's time to protect the gains that we've made in the past few months. We should be celebrating our relatively low numbers by continuing to show personal responsibility. Avoid unnecessary large gatherings, social distancing when we are around others, and wear face coverings when we cannot social distance. These are the only tools we have right now to slow the spread. Now, this can be made into a political debate about the rights to peaceably assemble versus the rights of the community. And I do believe there is ample precedent in favor of the rights of the community. But I believe the real wisdom about whether to embrace a public nuisance ordinance is along the lines of personal responsibility again. What happens when our infectivity rates and hospitalizations increase because some of us believe they know better than the public health experts? Those people won't take responsibility for the new restrictions that we will all have to endure. They take responsibility for the welfare of the businesses and restaurants that will have to be closed again. They take responsibility for the unnecessary illness and death. Believe me, I want to get back to normal. Every Sunday I miss Bluffvinia, I miss block parties, artists on the bluff, 4th of July celebration, the bike race. Now is not the time to let our guard down. So I support the public nuisance part of this ordinance, but we can have a bit more accountability, especially during this time.
Thank you, Aaron. Anyone? Am I hearing? Joy, is that you? Okay.
Yeah, that's me. Thank you, Madam President. I guess for me, the change language in this section to me is a little concerning. I feel like it's very arbitrary, and I also feel like it would be really difficult to enforce. As I read through what was the concern was what's the metric and how our police force be in effect enforcing this throughout the community. This is just not on village property, is my understanding. This is village-wide, so private property within the village, what have you. And I guess my bigger concern is who decides if a group of 13-year-olds in the park who are playing baseball are going to be fined because they're not wearing masks or they're not social distancing versus another group somewhere else. It just feels very arbitrary to me, and it just feels like the metrics are going to be really difficult. And I do feel like it might put an undue burden on our police force if they really were to enforce something like this. I know the intent is probably for egregious, people being reckless and egregious, but it just feels a little too far-reaching for me, and I'm not super comfortable with it.
Thank you, Joy. More comments?
I'll go next. So we have a declaration of civil emergency ongoing as we speak, enabled by Village President O'Hara. We have, as Trustee Toll noticed, a resurgence of cases happening in different parts of the country and happening in Illinois, by the way. I followed the numbers, and they're coming back. And from my standpoint, I've spent my life in healthcare and health IT. Nothing has changed since March 12th. There's no vaccine, there's no medication, we know about the disease, but there's nothing that will prevent the diffusion of the virus, literally. From a community standpoint, from a personal standpoint, and a family standpoint, we have made an investment to be safe. We have asked people to stay home. We have asked people to be careful, to wear masks, and frankly, nothing has changed. Okay, we might be comfortable with it today. We were not comfortable with it, but the situation is still the same. I really support this nuisance declaration, but I would like also, and similarly to what Trustee Markey was saying, where that's a little bit disturbing. I would like to put a time box around that nuisance declaration to basically follow the declaration of civil emergency. Once we're past that emergency, I don't know if we need that.
Okay, thank you. Other
think that's
trustees? Go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, I think Regis, Trustee Charlot provides kind of an interesting box into which this could go. I agree with Trustee Markey. The notion of creating something like this is a challenge. It's disturbing. It's hard to enforce, and yet we're dealing with a pandemic that, by its nature, defies each of those categories. We talk about the studies that we've been provided, that 1 in 3 to 1 in 4 people in a random group are positive. The greater sin, the greater concern for me is that we create a situation in which whether it's a child, whether it's a senior, whether it's a child or senior in contact with each other, but we create a situation in which we have either we create a process in which the disease can be conveyed, or in which the disease can prosper in a particular individual, and we watch that individual struggle and perhaps and potentially die. Yes, there are some demographics that are, perhaps age, that are somewhat mitigating, or maybe mitigating for sure, but I'd have a hard time having this presentation look down the road here and create a set of circumstances where we did not take this opportunity to be diligent, and we did not take this opportunity to be as responsible as we possibly can. Again, there would be challenges, and there are challenges in management of everything we've talked about tonight, whether it's a permit or whether it's any of these specific justification of any of these specific nuisances. I guess I'd rather err on the side of being careful than not. And again, I think Trustee Charlot might provide his idea of linking this to the local emergency or the state emergency declarations could provide us with a means for managing that, and ensuring that there aren't any necessary and long-term consequences for leaving this on the books.
I agree that we are in extraordinary times, and perhaps we would be wise to do something that protects the lives of the many at a very small sacrifice of some freedoms for few. But we do recognize that events are canceled, joy is lessened, community is not enhanced by being isolated. We recognize all these things, but in light of the cost, the opposite side of it, we have to make wise decisions and be good stewards. Two specific things that I'd like to mention is that Governor DeWine of Ohio was just tested positive. He's completely asymptomatic, and he was made aware of his positive status because he was about to meet with the president, and because of that, he is now not going to meet with the president. But that's a very, a high-profile example of someone who had no idea that they were positive and could have spread that to a number of people. And his responsible response was, to isolate and, take it seriously. So I also think that people keep talking about how, kids aren't as affected by the virus, but you have to look at relationships and tangential relationships. I have an 87-year-old mother that she doesn't really leave the house. I buy all her groceries. I drive her to all her doctor appointments, and anything that she needs, I do. And so I have to be super responsible. And it's kind of like a chain. It's a link, and the weakest link sometimes breaks the chain. And I don't want to be the weak link, and I want to create as many strong links as possible so that the weak, the vulnerable, those who don't have a voice, those who would be victims are protected. And I think that we have that responsibility. So what is it going to look like if we put something on the books about a public nuisance? Does that mean that someone can say, I don't like what these people are doing, you need to do something about it and do it right now? What does it actually look like in execution? And what types of things would our police force be obligated to cite, or do they have discretion? Just like when someone gets pulled over for driving too fast, sometimes you get a ticket, sometimes you get a warning. Would it be in application something like that? Those are questions that we can't answer every situation, and we can't have perfect knowledge, but having a discussion about what that might look like, I think, would be important. And I don't know how to answer the question, but I want to ask the question and at least talk about it.
Okay, thank you. I may be incorrect, but it seems like we don't have everyone exactly on the same page here. We have varying areas of this. I understand what everyone is saying. I agree. Our public health things it is. But I'm also listening to, how do you enforce something like this? How do you make it reasonable so that we don't have people saying, well, you did this, you did that, and not being able to, I guess I grew up in the 60s and we hated snitches. So a little bit there. I believe strongly that we need to do whatever we need to do, but I also want it has to be tempered by reasonableness, has to be tempered by common sense, and be able to be proven to be justifiable. So with your permission, I think, though, unlike the permit one, which is pretty clear cut for us, and we're in total agreement there, this one, correct me if I'm wrong, I think definitely needs more discussion, needs to be fleshed out. What would what would it look like? How would it be applied? Those kinds of things. So I would suggest that we continue this piece of that conversation, and we certainly can continue that on Monday if we so desire. Have I misread anything or said anything that you think is out of context here?
Well, the question I would want to ask Drew, because he's really understanding the abilities of staff to research and to follow up on a request. How do you see the staff's ability to provide any further details or further guidelines for how this might be actually applied? If there are similar ordinances that would be something we could look to say, oh, it's like this.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, and Mike's on the phone, Chief Hoskins on the phone. To date, we have written 0 citations related to COVID-19 activities or actions by anyone. And we've had a lot of conversations with folks and coaching of adults and children on the matter in terms of, I think it'd be like most anything that the village police department forces on a day-to-day basis. I suspect it would be progressive in nature. I suspect it would be, they would look at the totality of the circumstances, the context of the situation, and I would ask Mike Hosking to perhaps maybe speak to that with your experience, Mike, and with your understanding of our troops and how they manage it on a day-to-day basis already with a slew of regulations that we're out there enforcing already.
I think a number of key words have been said. I think the key is reasonableness. Quite frankly, I like the idea of having a clear-cut ordinance saying that people can be held accountable for doing something dangerous, because right now I don't think there is anything that we can hold people to. I mean, yes, we can educate people on the benefits of wearing a mask. We can educate people on social distancing. But I don't think there's really anything there that if people just flat out refuse, no, I'm not wearing a mask, no, I'm not separating, or anything else like that. And that's why I think it's incumbent upon my staff to talk to the residents, try and educate them to the health benefits. But I think that we need something that even if we never use it, that we could use it if just people flat out and say, no, I'm not going to do that, when they are creating that health risk to everybody. I'm certainly not looking for more people to arrest or to charge, and I don't think any police officer in the village is. I have the same 2 officers working 24 hours a day. Their names are changed, but it's not like starting tomorrow or starting Monday night, we can go out and issue 1,000 citations for people not wearing masks. And I don't think issuing 1,000 citations would do any good. I don't think it'd make it any more healthy. I think we could make the community much healthier by explaining to people why they should wear a mask, why they should socially distance themselves, and that's what I would much prefer to do. On the other hand, I do like having something behind me to say, okay, if all else fails, this is what we're going to have to do.
And Madam President, I think echoing what the chief just said, what he's been explaining and what Drew mentioned as well shows that we have in Lake Bluff a resource that is so valuable in the police department that exercises discretion, prosecutorial discretion. They know what it's like on the ground to make the right decisions, but we need to give them some tools so that there's some teeth in those decisions. And I know we've had a lot of discussion here about this. I think we do have a consensus among at least 5 trustees that we should have something on the books about nuisances. I know that we've had both in this discussion and also from some public comments through email and such, some concern about overreaching. That is why I brought forth this idea of putting in intentionally or recklessly language into this, because that raises the standard legally where in order to issue the citation, you need to have that level of intent. I think that gives both a control on the consequences of this nuisance statute, but also gives the police ultimately the tool that they'll need in combination with their good discretion, in combination with their good experience, and everything they've done that is good and proper in this village historically, but it'll give them the tool that they need to deal with situations to protect the public health. And I think we heard from at least 4 trustees other than me who have a concern about this disease. And certainly what I heard Trustee Toll say as well, I certainly agree with, and I think we need to do something to give the police some tools to exercise in their discretion as appropriate. So I would urge that we go forward with this, with the board to consider the modification of the language. But I think we ought to do something in terms of passing it on Monday night.
Well, I don't disagree with that, but as I said, my only concern is that it's tempered, it's just, and handled in a fair and equitable manner. And so perhaps adding some of the language that has been suggested would help that. So I would like to suggest then that we to continue that discussion for this on Monday night with the revised wording that perhaps could make this what we want it to be, which is reasonable and just. Does that pretty much sum that up?
I wanted to address the end date.
I'm sorry, what?
The ending date could be do we want to have this somehow related to the declaration of emergency?
Yes.
Do we want to have an end date?
I think we're looking for, I would be more comfortable with a sunset date on this. Others?
I would too.
It's somewhat addressed in the language of in violation of public health orders, right? And that's
Right.
That literally states that once the declaration of emergency is over, once the public health emergency is over, then the violations are no longer.
All right.
It's covered.
Is that what you would interpret it, Peter?
I think it's actually a little broader than that, Trustee Toll. The first language to engage in any activity that promotes the spread of contagious or infectious diseases throughout the village, including without limitation. So it probably is beyond that. I don't, frankly, it is another policy decision. We could very easily add in this section, tie it to the governor's disaster declaration or the village president's local emergency order.
Do we want to limit it to that?
Well, that's the policy question.
Even after the public health emergency is over, are we okay with people spreading infectious and contagious diseases in the village?
Okay. Mr. Charlot?
Thank you. I think there is a difference between we spread the flu among us and there is no declaration of civil emergency, as opposed to we have that thing right now, the COVID-19, and President O'Hara having declared having enacted a declaration of civil emergency. I would be favorable to have that nuisance policy associated with the declaration of civil emergency. And when that civil emergency disappears, then that nuisance declaration also is fizzles. That would be my preference. Now, following other comments, I don't know how, we want to provide the tools to Chief Hoskins, but I'm also favorable to also adding some education as part of that, because that might also be useful.
All right. Ms. Markey?
Sure, I agree with what Regis just said. I would really like to see a sunset provision on this, and when the emergency declaration for COVID-19 is done, then this language is done as well. I still feel like it's quite vague, and I would really like to understand how decisions would be made for giving out fines and citations on this, because I like, in general, I would prefer things to be more consistent and not so arbitrary, and this language just feels, even with the suggestions Bill made, and I'm not a lawyer, but it just feels very broad and arbitrary to me. So I'm clearly not opposed to public health. That's very important, but I just want to make sure we get the wording on this right, because I think it does make a difference.
Having been in law enforcement, I can attest to many laws are somewhat vague, and that there's significant discretion that is given to both police officers and judges. And I don't know that this is contrary to many other laws that are in place as far as public indecency. There's several other laws that are vague in this way and by design. I think it just gives the police a tool to fall back on if lower, or I guess, education and suggestion don't work.
Okay?
And if it takes the sunset date to get this passed, then I will compromise on that and we'll be fine with that. However, I think with Trustee Meyer's additional language, I think that could go on in perpetuity. I don't know that we need to sunset with Trustee Meyer's language.
Okay. All right. Anybody else? All right, then I would suggest we do bring that forward with revised language and bring that forward to Monday. Any, and I think please add, lack of a better terminology, I guess I would say a sunset provision at the end of the civil emergency. Okay. Drew, do you have any further questions and things on that?
I just wanted to clarify that goes for the same language as written would come forward as well for the section of the amendments and the ordinance dealing with your declaration of civil emergency, and is that calling that out expressly as a penalty as well, or that action?
Are you saying, Drew, whether there should be a sunset provision on the Section 3 amendment?
Well,
because that one is only related to her order, so if her order goes away, there can't be a violation.
No, I just, my clarity was that, does Section 3 move forward as well? Just want crystal clear on that as well.
I thought I heard that there was consensus on that.
Okay. I knew there was for Section 8 and 10, I just wanted to understand that, okay.
So we will have something definitive on which to vote with respect to the permitting process on Monday night, and we will have a draft of the other provisions relative to nuisances and whatnot that we would have for further discussion on Monday night. Is that correct?
I think what I would suggest is that we make these changes to the ordinance on all the sections, and then Monday night, if we don't have consensus on this section or that section, you can just extract it.
Okay.
Okay.
Via
Very
motion,
good.
whatever, yeah.
Very good.
Okay. Is everybody in agreement with those? Okay.
Yes.
All right.
We are in agreement. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all very much. Okay, at this point in time, we can now open for public comment. I have two people here in the not virtual reality here this evening. And I am asking you must please limit it to 3 minutes. Okay? All right, Mr. Lee, we'll start with you. Please come up.
Thank you. David Lee at 108 West Witchwood. Actually, I'm here on behalf of the Kiwanis Club of Lake Bluff Lake Forest. And Kiwanis has been utilizing the Village Green for the 4th of July pancake breakfast since 1972, and 2 street corners for our candy days in September. For several years now, we've been submitting already an permit application for the green, which has been fine, and we feel a more detailed permit policy is a good measure for all. That being said, giving the village administrator discretion to set or waive the permit deposit is a much better idea than having a set matrix. Also in your draft, it states that you can apply for a permit up to 1 year in advance of the event. Should it also state what the expected turnaround time would be for the organization to receive a yes or no?
Okay, thank you, sir, very much. All right. Sir, would you like to come up?
Can I pull this when I talk? Can I pull this down when I
Oh,
talk?
yes, yes, you certainly can. Sorry about that.
Forgive me. I'm sorry for my appearance. I wasn't expecting to be here. Rob Davis, 20-year resident of 673 Rockland Avenue. Thank you all. I see some friendly faces up there, so appreciate you guys and very thoughtful discussion of this. My only focus is on the amendment or the addition of the public nuisance. And I'll say this is the first, not the first village meeting I've attended, the first one I've ever felt strongly enough to actually speak at. When I read it, I think Trustee Marquis spoke to many of the points I was concerned about. My first reading of it is, it literally describes what everybody does every day in their lives. Everything we do is, if you get near someone, if you hug someone you're related to, you are engaging in an activity that could spread a disease. I don't know how the village is going to enforce this. I'm afraid that we're coming up with a solution in search of a problem. I'm not in any way belittling what is happening. Do not misunderstand me. But I've been in Lake Bluff since March like everybody else. And unless I'm missing something, I see people trying to go about their lives in the last few months since we've come out of hard lockdown. And I think the citizens of this town deserve to be praised for the way we've behaved. And candidly, I feel like the Board of Trustees are putting forth something that looks like you're going to make criminals out of your citizens if they want to go about their daily lives. And I have a real problem with that. I do appreciate Trustee Meyer trying to come up with some language around reckless or, I forget what you said. My challenge, and I am a lawyer, but I will say, I don't know what that means. And I mean, none of us do. I don't think we're going to get to a judge to see what that means. And I appreciate, while I'm a huge fan of the police force here, as Aaron knows, I was a member of Lake Bluff Fire Department for 8 years. I don't know if you want to put that on our policemen to say, you get to pick who on the street you want to go say you're violating this public nuisance. Holding hands could be a violation of that. If there's something we're really trying to address, I would encourage the Board of Trustees to be specific about what it is you're trying to address. I'm also, and I'm not here in any capacity as a member of the Lake Bluff Baseball Board, but I am a 10-year member of the Lake Bluff Baseball Board. We just finished house and travel seasons for, I think, 300 plus kids involved with, thankfully, blessedly, 0 instances of a COVID positive case. I think we should, as a community, be praised for that. And I feel like the trustees are coming out down on their citizens. I'm really troubled by a board that is thinking about increasing police power for its citizens when we're doing things that are right. If there's things you're worried about, be specific about it. But I will say this, there's a large swath of this community that is happy to go along and try to make things work. If you make us feel like criminals, it will not be helpful to the process. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, do we have anyone virtually that would like to speak?
Certainly, Madam President. At this time, I am aware of 4 people that will take in order. First up will be Mr. Robert Metz.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Metz, if you will unmute yourself, you are live with the Board of Trustees.
Okay, hi everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
All right. Well, thank you all very much for the opportunity, and this is a fascinating process. My name is Robert Metz. I live at 112 Oak Terrace, and I suspect that some of my planning has caused some of tonight's discussion. But I want to echo what was just shared so eloquently by the last speaker. What is it that we're trying to solve for? We know that from a COVID-19 perspective, Lake County is significantly down from its highs in May. We know that I have not been aware that any of the Concert on the Green activities or any other activities specific in Lake Bluff have created positive contact tracing back to any event. Last week, and even as far as today, what's being reported in the data is that the numbers continue to go down. There was a comment a little earlier that wasn't the case, but if you go onto the website and you check the COVID positives, they're down. We know that the COVID death rate is plateaued, and at least half the cases, of course, are coming out of long-term care facilities. So the fact is that the numbers are impressively reducing. The number of events that we're talking about we mentioned that there's church on Sundays for an hour. I've held a couple of concerts there for 3 hours each to a total of 6 hours. We know that youth baseball occasionally gets together. The total number of events are tremendously low. And it drives me to ask the question, is all of this happening because there's harassing phone calls coming into the City Hall and the police department from chronically frightened community members? I have a father that's 81 years old in Chicago, and I tell him, I'm 30 years in biotechnology and pharmaceuticals. I understand how to read clinical studies. I tell him to shelter in place and not leave. But the majority of the people in this community are not frightened. As the previous speaker mentioned, they're just trying to live a normal life, which has been commented throughout the day. Citizens here have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, regardless of what chronically frightened population may think. City Hall should reject the calls and tell those frightened individuals that they simply should stay home. If they don't want to leave the house, if they they're frightened to that level, then they simply should just shelter in place. But because you have a frightened minority that's out there, I personally don't believe that they should have the right to adjust our lifestyle for the majority of the people in this community, because it is a minority of the community. Out of my own pocket and others from the community, we've paid for people to walk around with free masks at our events. We've put up signs at our own expense to socially distance. But as the comment was made earlier by Chief Hosking, the state of Illinois, the village of Lake Bluff, the city of Chicago, no one can mandate right now that you must wear a mask. And I think that drives the frightened minority. It puts them off a cliff. So what I'm asking, I think that those that are engaged in these activities, they should remain educated on what the requirements are. 6 feet or wear a mask. And I think that this community is doing a fabulous job. When you look at the numbers...
Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to wrap it up, okay?
Okay, fair enough. Thank you.
Thank you.
I believe that, and my organization believes that additional regulation is not the solution to this. Treating people as adults in this community, as taxpayers to utilize the services and the geographies is what we should be doing, and I believe that we're doing this responsibly. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next.
Yes, next up, we will take Mr. Lee Neistat.
Hello, everybody. I'm Lee Neistat. I'm a resident of the town for 40 years. I very much appreciate everything that you, the board, are doing here tonight. I really do. It's a wonderful thing. I'm going to read a statement that I submitted to the board this morning, so I'm going to try to make it quick, succinct, but let's face it, we're here because of a pandemic. I don't think that this particular board would be meeting for this meeting at all if this hadn't happened. Here's my statement. In this age, in this country, public sentiment is everything. With it, nothing can fail. Against it, nothing can succeed. Whoever holds and molds public sentiment goes deeper than he who enacts statutes or pronounces judicial decisions. That's a quote from Abraham Lincoln. Lincoln went on to say that public voice must be heard and that elected government officials are here to rule based on what the public has voted for and against. Our own Supreme Court Justice Roberts has said and ruled time and time again that elected officials, must be the voice of the public, and our courts should not deviate from the voice of the people. It is my opinion, this is Neistat, the resident and father of 3 kids that grew up in Lake Bluff. It is my opinion and steadfast position that the government must be here to protect us from enemies, both foreign and domestic. Sometimes we must get protection from our own neighbors. This is why we're here tonight, ladies and gentlemen. Let's be very specific. The virus that is killing hundreds of thousands of people in our world today is indeed an enemy. We have proven ways to deal with a virus like this, albeit many of our own citizens are refusing to follow such sane and common sense remedies, such as wearing masks and staying far enough away from each other that transmission to each other is all but impossible. The science is very clear now, and we must not ignore it. We have rights, yes, but none of us have the right to endanger another human being with this virus. The fact is, many of us do not know, nor do we have it. We don't know if we have it sometimes. The cases that are showing up, as was alluded to earlier, the governor of Ohio. Therefore, we must wear masks to prevent the vulnerable amongst us. We are forced by our government to buy car insurance. We travel with many requirements that have been placed upon us by our government. These laws are here to protect us from enemies. Until there is a vaccine and medicines which will help prevent death and suffering from this virus, we must follow our laws and create laws that will protect all of us. The virus will not go away and vanish if left alone. If we spread it, it will thrive for many years to come. We have laws in Illinois now, as declared by the governor. We have an emergency order by the Honorable Kathleen O'Hara. We have a way to prevent the spread of this virus in Lake Bluff, Illinois. It's real simple. We must pass comprehensive laws to protect all of us from people that would harm us and our families. No mask, no service. That seems pretty simple. Groups above a certain size must be stopped, and there cannot be any exceptions. Thank you, and I bid you peace.
Okay. Who's next?
Certainly, this, and I apologize, this next one, I believe was intended to be read out loud. This is very short from Miss Adrienne Fawcett. Listening to the meeting, lots of talk about penalties. Can the village prevent an event from taking place in a pandemic? The next after that is Mr. Mark Stolzenberg.
The opportunity to speak, and I appreciate you taking time out of your Thursday evening to hold this meeting tonight. My comments this evening are going to be directed toward the permitting section that you're looking to add to the village code. And I speak in strong favor of this. Frankly, I think this is a reasonable way to regulate the use of village-owned public spaces, protect public health and safety, and ensure the efficient use of village resources, whether or not a pandemic is occurring. As a side note, my day job is as a labor attorney, so I've had reason to look at ordinances like this quite frequently because from time to time my job involves demonstrations, strikes, picketing, and other things that would implicate ordinances such as these. To the point that Trustee Marquis raised before, I've looked at the ordinances here in the village before, and I'm actually also surprised that we didn't have a comprehensive system for regulating the use of public spaces. I mean, right now we kind of have a patchwork of applications. For example, the block party application, I suppose, is because you can't block streets without permission, right? The special event form, frankly, I'm not sure exactly what the authority is for that, perhaps the nuisance ordinance, but I think having a comprehensive system in place is a wise way to ensure that we're making our public spaces available to everyone. Looking at draft ordinance, I would recommend an additional paragraph or provision in section 753A. One thing I've noticed that the permit application doesn't ask about is amplified sound. I think that's something you want to know about, whether or not someone's going to bring a big Marshall stack to the Village Green and blow everyone's ears out, because amplified sound, of course, can be a very important part of an event such as this, or an event that might be held on public property. I agree that this ordinance is content neutral on its face. Everyone is treated alike, and I think that's a very good thing. I also agree with the insurance requirement. As an example, Ribfest is one of my favorite events every year. I go every year. You'll never see me as an entrant there because I'll probably be arrested for public nuisance if I ever serve my cooking to anyone. So, that said, I also think an insurance requirement for something like Ribfest is probably not a bad idea. Think about what it is. It is fire, booze, sharp knives, and crowds. You put those together, insurance is probably a wise idea for something like that. And I don't think that burdens the organizers too much. That said, I also agree that we want to make sure we keep our colloquial environment here and that we make it easy for people to have events and keep our sense of community. One last thing, in terms of complaints that individuals might raise in the future about the constitutionality of a permitting requirement or permitting process such as this. This proposed provision is pretty much right down the middle of the constitutional guardrails of time, place, manner restrictions on First Amendment speech. Quite frankly, I don't think there'll be any problem finding these to be reasonable time, place, manner restrictions, and any questions about the constitutionality of this proposed ordinance, I think ought not pain anyone. So thank you much for the opportunity to be heard, and thanks for your service on behalf of the village. Have a great evening.
Thank you. Is there anyone else?
Yes, there is. Next up, we will take Mr. Tom Dickelman.
Okay.
Tom, if you would unmute yourself, you are on the air.
All right. Thank you, Glenn, very much. The Community Church of Lake Forest and Lake Bluff, where I am the minister, has probably utilized Village of Lake Bluff public space maybe more than anyone the last couple of months. And I simply want to give you all a sense on a very practical level of how that has gone for us. It began when we were not able to meet at college because of COVID, and then we couldn't meet at the beach, which is where we hold our services all summer long because of the water levels and the limited number of folks who could be down there. So we had nowhere to go, and I made a phone call to Drew, and Drew said, yes, you can meet at the gazebo, but what you need to do is make sure that everyone wears masks, that you social distance, that you make accommodations for bathrooms, and that you have signage so people who come into the park from wherever there's an entry know what the rules were. And we did all that and have done all that. And so for the last more than 2 months now, we have met every Sunday morning at 10 o'clock. And I simply want you all to know how grateful we are as a community organization that in large part is about trying to serve the residents of Lake Bluff and Lake Forest. How great it is to have you all as our partner. And so we're filled with gratitude. We hope to meet there, for another month or two until the weather changes. And from our standpoint, please know that filling out forms or making any deposit that you see as being appropriate is a very small price to pay for us to have the privilege of meeting in the park. And the bottom line is we are grateful for the leadership of Lake Bluff in terms of the staff as well as volunteers who have provided an opportunity for us to do what we do on Sunday morning. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Tom. Do we have anyone next here?
Yes, next up is Mr. Rick Lesser. Rick, when you unmute yourself, you are able to talk.
Good. Thank you very much, Glenn. And thank you all, members of the board and Bill's president, for your service to the village. I know this is a tough time for everybody. Special events, as I think you all appreciate, are very important to the village. Sometimes these are one-time events, other times they are annual and become a part of the tradition. In the past, we've had a very informal process. There has been no real fee and I think that a more robust ordinance is clearly needed in light of more events that we have and now the pandemic showing this. I don't want to belabor any of the things that other people have said, which I think were all very well taken. I do think that the nuisance section as written should be bolstered up by making any kind of a violation have to be intentional or with reckless disregard, as Bill Meyer has proposed. Otherwise, I think it is true that it is very easy to violate and thus would be questionable. But thank you all for doing this, and this is a necessary step. I strongly support you. Thank you.
Thank you.
That is everyone who has requested to
All
speak,
right,
Madam
I
President.
believe we have a gentleman here that would like to speak. Please come on. No?
I'm good. Just
You're
observing.
good. Oh, you're just observing, Mr. Erzinger. Thank you very much.
I'll
Okay.
speak Monday.
Okay. All right. So we have no one else?
It does not appear so, Madam President.
All right. Unless we have anything else from members of the board, I will ask for a motion to adjourn. Thank you, Mr. Meyer. And do I have a second? Second by Mr. Charlot. All in favor? I'm assuming everybody's saying aye. I don't think anybody's saying no. Thank you all for this evening, and we will see you Monday night. Thank you.
Have a good night.